A mi izquierda está Anneke Smith. Anneke es
Anneke is a
abogada.
lawyer.
Ella es
She is
profesora
an associate
asociada
professor at the
de
law
Derecho
faculty
de la
of
Universidad de
the
Windsor
University
en
of Windsor in
Canadá.
Canada.
Ella ha
She
trabajado
worked
en la
with
sección de
she has worked with
migración y
the section of
refugiados de la
immigration and
Corte
the
de
Refugee
Justicia
Justice
Federal
Department in
y
Canada,
además con
and also with
organizaciones
non-governmental
gubernamentales
organizations
y
and human rights
organizaciones de
organizations
derechos humanos en los
in the
Balcanes y el
Balkans
Cáucaso
and the
Occidental.
Southern
Tiene
Caucasus.
intereses en
Uh,
investigación que
she has
incluyen temas
researched
como derecho a la
interests
propiedad,
including issues such
legislación
as
del uso
property
del
rights,
suelo, derechos
land
de
use planning,
refugiados y justicia
refugee
después de
law and
los
justice.
conflictos. Entonces, muchas gracias, Anneke, por
Uh,
acompañarnos
Good morning.
en esta
Thank you very
presentación.
much for the invitation to be here. Um, I feel maybe a little bad about what is happening, but then it is my first opportunity here in the country, and I feel great to share it with you. Um, uh, okay, as Natalia mentioned, I am a professor of the University of Windsor Law School in Canada. For those of you who know more the United States better than Canada, Canada is north of Detroit, across the river. So I can see Detroit from my window, and I have to say that it's a very interesting place to be in. It's very different. It's a very different context. I've been in different contexts from those that we have here, but then I've also faced issues related to equity, economic development, the climate and environment. Uh, my work on the issue of restitution has not occurred in this part of the world. It has happened in the Soviet Union, in countries that belong to the Soviet Union, such as the Balkans, uh, also in the Middle East, in Jerusalem. So I will use some examples of these places to show you all where I come from and what I've done. My role nowadays is not here as an expert here in Colombia, but I'm here doing is bringing different experiences and maybe showing you some discussions that have occurred internationally related to secondary occupation and restitution, generally speaking. Uh, Giving you some ideas that you can use to think and understand in Colombia. How secondary occupation is a discussion that is just beginning to come about. I told you that my slides would be a little difficult to read. I wanted to give you something visual. It's not in Spanish. Uh, I will also share the presentation with anyone who wants it. The material can be obtained after the presentation. So property, housing, or HLP as we call it in English, occupation through secondary occupants. This also called forced displacement, leaving a land, leaving an empty house, which is then occupied by others. This is what is called secondary occupation. These other people, in many cases, have been maybe people who also have been forced from their lands, have been taken from their land from other parts of the country. These people may also have been given this space through officials or people working with utilities. So here we have two different scenarios that are there. There are two different ways also of looking at the issue of secondary occupation. Um, it's pretty hard to read, and I offer apologies as an introduction because I think that for us who are interested in restitution, our first concern always has to do with restoring what was lost. And the issue of restoring what was lost has to do with a person or party or group which has been stripped of their land or property. However, what we are increasingly seeing in some of the post-conflict situations in the international community, what we see is a growth of recognition that that there are these issues that may be controversial. Then I'll say this anyway. There are issues of justice that are inherent also in the issue of how we handle the secondary occupation. In some circumstances, at least. So I wanted to start by giving these paragraphs. So please follow me as we look at these issues. Some come from Bosnia. Mbar, who is here too, was also in Bosnia. She has more experience than me, but then we were also in Kosovo, and that is reflected in both on secondary occupation. So I want you to hear this. I want you to bear this in mind. In mind, the first is a report, the Rockter report of 2005. A news agency, a couple in Bosnia had lit them on fire because they had been forced to leave their house where they were. They were secondary occupants. So according to the legal framework in Bosnia, the house uh, he had to hand over to the original owner. A decision was made in favor of this person, and this family had been there for nearly a decade, and they were asked to leave. The response was lit on fire. So this shows the intensity of feelings that sometimes are inherent in secondary occupants. Uh, in Kosovo, something similar occurred. The New York Times describing an Albanian person who was asked to leave his house. That the house that he was occupying, he had been occupying since 2000. This person had to leave his home at the end of 1999. Some ethnic Albanians had to leave some areas, and when they returned, there was another wave of displacement. Some populations in Kosovo had to leave where they were. Then, as a result of the process of restitution that happened in Kosovo under the Directory of Homes and Properties, a decision in favour of the original owner was taken. The secondary occupant was asked to leave. Uh, the article talks about the challenges, concerns of the restitution process. We will return to this in a few moments. The question is, what do we restitute? That we restore. What do we restore? What line? What is the point in time and in which we work on restitution? In the case of Kosovo, the armed conflict had the disputes related to land before the appearance of conflict. So these people who were being taken from the land properties, they said maybe you're returning to the situation that had occurred in 1999, but you do not experience the decades of problems that we had earlier. So I think this is one of the issues we need to keep in our minds when we talk about secondary occupation. An Albanian said, "This is not justice; it's revenge." I'm not saying this because this is the complete truth. I'm just trying to show you the intensity of the moment of what a secondary occupant who has to go what they have to go through emotionally. So briefly, this is what I want to do in the time we have to talk about secondary occupation in a global sense, and also discuss the international legal framework concerning secondary occupation, and also talk about the challenges, uh, what I call the line of restitution of property and solutions that can be generated based on some of the experiences or areas where I worked. See if we can have some conclusions and recommendations. I will leave this for the panelists who know a lot better about the situation. If you have any questions. So overall, I would say that for 15 years or so, I have seen an increase in the discussion of secondary occupation. Uh, this has increased, or even more so during the last 5 or 7 years. The promotion and protection of human rights. This started being done at the end of the 90s. The restitution or return of property after conflicts occurred in Bosnia, in Azerbaijan, in Georgia, Kosovo, among others. And this has been recognized in these countries, in these conflicts. Restitution still remains an issue that should be handled. We can add Iraq, Eastern Ukraine, Colombia, Syria, all these places that are conflict areas where secondary occupation occurs, and is something that restitution that still must be handled. It is something that is still part of what happens in the country, which is a situation that must be handled in many cases. we are handling. In many cases, we are handling a residential property. Natalia was asking before in the session in the secondary occupation in Colombia. It is related. It is related to residential property. She told me that in most cases we're talking about land and resources and not residences. But many jurisdictions, secondary occupation will be related to homes. I don't want to look at this in much detail. Don't want to revise this in much detail, but I want to mention, and I think Barbara already did so during the opening session yesterday. I was sorry that I couldn't have been here, but a reference to the principles of Pinheiro, which are laws that the UN passed in 2005. Basically, this is the result of different efforts, internationally united. I want to mention here that this is based on the experience of Bosnia and Kosovo and what was done at an international level. This is something very important that has to do with intervention and restitution processes. Principles that I want to mention here that although are not binding internationally, have had an impact in different jurisdictions. There's a Colombian article that was written, I think, maybe in 2010 or 2011. Not 100% certain, but this article talks about the application, the difficulty of applying the principles of Pinheiro in different places. So there is already a reference to the principles, and I want to highlight, maybe like yesterday, that the principles of Pinheiro what we call the bright line methodology. Restitution after the conflict. This methodology, this bright line methodology, is a methodology that seeks to be a remedy through the restitution of property or land, unless it is possible to do or is part of a negotiation that has been carried out. There was also focus on the restitution independent of the return. So the principles have been developed in such a way that we can discuss this later, but they were developed so that it does not matter if the person filing the complaint wants to return or not. They have the right to restitution. So this is an independent right. Restitution for these people regarding secondary occupants. Defined principles tell us that the focus here is to do with the person who had the rights before the conflict. There's also a mention in the principles of Pinheiro about secondary occupation. Principle 17 that we're going to see on the screen, and I'll read it to you. I'll read a little of what the principle is. The state must ensure that secondary occupants are protected from, that they are taken away arbitrarily from the properties. So here secondary occupation is clearly mentioned. The state must ensure that for instances where the occupants have to be drawn from these properties, so that it is compatible with international standards and to follow a process. So there is a procedure. It is a procedural guarantee. We're talking about not the protection of property or rights, nor property for that occupant. What is said here is that you must follow an appropriate process, and you must protect the rights of the person being removed from the property. In case the second part is not clear, we can see at the bottom of the screen it tells us about the process, secondary occupants and the original owners. Both are mentioned here, but difference is made between them. So this is an overall view of the principles of Pinheiro provided by these guidelines. I would say based on the experiences of Kosovo and Bosnia. This refers to the Colombian context. The Georgian also, if you look at the areas of conflict, you will see Iraq, Syria. All these areas refer to the principles of Pinheiro. What you'll also see, I think, since 2005 is the principle of the recognition that this bright line methodology applied in different jurisdictions and in different conflict zones. In reality, this does not attack the particularities, the specific things in a specific specific conflict. It is not the same for everyone. Colombia is not Bosnia. Colombia is not Kosovo. It is not Georgia nor Syria. Everything is different. This isolation, this restitution isolated to the resolution of property issues in conflict in post-conflict. Everything is very broad in these principles. And I could also say that the focus on restitution and away from the issue of return, it is not always appropriate to happen. If so, then this should be discussed to the extent it should be applied to. That it should be applied. Sorry. Some of the challenges I see in different jurisdictions and different actors, things that we have to handle, or that they have to handle, and we will be able to see on the screen how much we have to return in time to restitute. How far do you want to turn back the clock? That is another question. Also, will we protect any stay on the property? Some amount of time, if not, every occupation will end. How long you need to be on a property before a person earns the right to that property? They must be there for a year, perhaps. You think a year is very little. 5 years is a long time to live in a place. In 5 years, you become part of a community. 30, 35 years, 50, 60 years. A lot can change in these amounts of time. What type of property will be returned to? All these questions have to do with secondary occupation. Not directly, but they're related because taking a decision regarding the type of property that we will restore, we are saying that the rights of these people who occupy them will be respected or maybe not. We're talking about residential property, we're talking about commercial property, and they all have different implications for the secondary occupant to be removed from the property or not. To what degree the process of restitution should look back, and when should it look ahead, and this has to do somehow with the work of James Sweeney, an academic who spoke about the idea of post-conflict justice related with these bright lines compared to transitional justice, which means many things. But in this case, the transitional justice has to do with the whole process, not only justice for one person, for a society, is what is wanted. What we need the society to have working is to make it happen. And when we talk about secondary occupants, we are talking about a methodology of stricter justice. Challenges again related to property claims, requisitions, but maybe then the secondary occupant does present some documentation. Well, they may have some type of rights, and perhaps this is repetitive. But then the claims of secondary occupants are valid or not. Comparisons in the legal system, how we handle property law, for example, prescriptive rights. This is controversial, I also realize, but when we talk about prescription in America, we call this adverse possession. These are property rights that have to do with the passing of time. And when we talk about a situation of post-conflict, we're not talking about a previous owner who left his property. We're talking about a person who was removed by force. But then in many jurisdictions, when they talk about prescriptive rights, we're talking about rights without compensation. There is a correlation. If we add compensation there is a change. Do we add compensation to the previous owner or not? Is there any change if this happens or not? The question again, whether we should join the we should join the return back to the restitution. We want to have a bright line for this restitution. If this owner, before the conflict, wants to return or not. This is a big issue here in Colombia at the moment, as it happens in many other jurisdictions for reasons of social cohesion, equal opportunities, healthcare, safety. Many people do not return or decide not to return for many of these reasons. So we have a hard line where we join the restitution with returning or not. This is an important decision. One of the arguments that has been made for some jurisdictions where there is a hardline restitution, the choice is of the owner of the property. Restitution of property, and they decide whether they stay or sell. Then if they sell, they take the money they earn from the sale and they go elsewhere. Another consideration is some jurisdictions that sometimes don't sound logical. Sometimes doesn't sound logical, but can occur in the process of urbanization after the conflict. So the property that they give back to you might be worth much less than the property that you want to buy, or the property where you want to live. So is this actually useful for the owner to return or not? The question of investment, if you are a secondary occupant and have had the property for 35 years, what improvements have you made to the property? What transformations? Culturally, how is it yours? How is it for your needs? Is it still good for the person who wants to return, either as land for agricultural use or for another purpose? Finally, I think we cannot leave aside the question of restitution and how much we will turn back the clock. I think that we mentioned in the panel this morning economic development, transformation, the uses of rural areas of the cities in the society. Um, uh, what do we need to do to move forward? You know better than I do here in Colombia what is needed here. But it is a situation that handles different jurisdictions in which we place the line, uh, the hard line restitution and how we use it to be able to move forward. Those are very difficult questions that are still not answered, and they're not answered easily, but are questions that they have to be made. So in the couple of minutes left, what are some of the creative solutions? I don't think there are solutions that cover everything, but I can talk about what we do internationally. The Human Rights Court in Europe has made decisions that are much more open to the rights of secondary occupants, to the protection of these rights. There is a social fabric, an economic fabric, which takes place in communities over time, and it's not simply a matter of turning back the clock. In Iraq, the question of compensation has been very lively with many problems in context. It has been, but the question of compensation has been used more. The idea of supporting the owners before the conflict, where they where are they, or where are they living now, or how can they acquire property in places where they are living after the conflict. This is happening in Georgia, in Armenia, Azerbaijan, where similar conflicts have occurred. Decisions have been made also for how long we will restore the property. You must define a timeline. I think 10 years in Europe. If you lost your property for a period of 10 years, uh, I think you can apply for restitution. And then proposals coming out of the Israeli-Palestinian context, restitution of property with the possibility of long-term leasing. Issues of sharing land. I don't know if this happened successfully between previous owners and secondary occupants, but this issue can also be managed. So it must be handled case by case. The international community is moving forwards. Is moving towards a more balanced approach, looking at the particular case and the country. and the occupants if they have committed crimes, that is a totally different scenario. And returning to the issue of transitional justice, how can we how how can we move society along? How can we handle a methodology of post-conflict justice? I'll leave it here for now, and I think we'll have more context later. Thank you.
Especificidad del caso, el del país y los ocupantes han cometido crímenes. Ese es un escenario totalmente diferente. Y volviendo a esta cuestión de qué queremos decir cuando hablamos de justicia transicional, cómo hacemos que la sociedad avance. ¿Cómo manejamos una metodología de justicia post-conflicto? Los voy a dejar aquí y creo que vamos a tener más contexto más adelante. Muchas gracias.